Hello, everyone. This is Tommy, World at War Comics, creator of Kingsville, an amazing comic book that you could get your hands on November 30th with our Kickstarter. Go to Kickstarter right now, type in Kingsville. You'll see it right there. Hit that notify button. That way it lets you know when we go live. All right. Today's podcast is absolutely amazing, but it's brought to you by a couple really good friends. First, cienchiles.com. Go to cienchiles.com to get all the best hot sauce that you could buy. It's absolutely incredible stuff delivered right to your door. Use comics at checkout and save 15% off your total order. We are also partnered with Comic Crusaders, the best in comic book reviews, movie reviews, music reviews. You can even follow Comic Crusaders on YouTube for all the incredible interviews that they do. All right, without further ado, really, there's nothing that I could say that you probably don't already know about this guest, but our guest is Geoff Johns, writer, creator, award-winning writer and creator, I should say. He is a producer, showrunner. He's done it all, CCO and president at DC Comics, and now one of the founding members of Ghost Machine, a creator-owned publishing company. It's absolutely incredible. If you don't already know, producer and writer and creator for Geiger, Junkyard Joe, and so many different titles that are coming starting next year in January with Ghost Machine. So without further ado, our next guest is Mr. Geoff Johns. Enjoy. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to World at War Comics. Today, my special guest is Mr. Geoff Johns. I mean, Geoff, I was thinking, like, how do I announce you and let everyone know who you are? But if you're in the comics, man, I think you know who Geoff Johns is. But if you don't, best-selling writer, creator, producer, showrunner. Am I leaving anything out? I mean, you've done pretty much everything there is to do in comics up to this point.
Yeah, I think that's about it, Tommy. Collector, too. Collector.
Yeah, collector, exactly. Awesome, man. Well, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you stopping by the podcast. I was at San Diego Comic-Con, and I was able to pick up the ash can with the Ground Zero. And it was kind of like a little bit of a light announcement, right? And then all of a sudden, New York Comic-Con comes, and boom, everything is released, man. I mean, how exciting was that to be able to do that at a con like New York Comic-Con, to be able to kind of share with the world with you and the team?
Oh, it was awesome. We've been working on this for well over a year now. So Brad and Brian and Jay and Gary and everybody, Pete, we've been dying to talk about it. And so in New York Comic-Con, we were nervous because we talked to so many people about this, to get it up and running, to have a booth there and books and everything, and just start and hit the ground running there. And it didn't leak. And we were so happy for that, because it's hard to surprise people nowadays in comic books. And we did that. But New York Comic-Con was great. The feedback was amazing. The turnout was awesome. The booth was fun. And it feels so good to launch something new with people you absolutely love working with, and on stuff you love working on. It's been awesome.
For sure. I mean, let's talk a little bit about Ghost Machine, right? So it's fully creator owned in every single aspect of that. And then I noticed that you also partnered with Image Comics, who I think kind of set the standard for that type of an element. Can you talk about how important it was that it was creator owned and that your partner was Image?
Yeah, it's easy. Image. So I've known Eric Stevenson forever. Image, obviously, when I was growing up, they launched, and it was so amazing to see Spawn and Savage Dragon and Wildcats and all these great new characters by top talent. It was amazing. And so Image has been a real inspiration for all of us in our careers and our lives. And it was always the gold standard for us of creator-owned comics, because Image is a place where it stands for that like nobody else, because you publish through Image, have a great partnership with their entire team, their marketing and PR and production and everyone there. And then you control and own the property, the character you create, you own 100%. And you still control all aspects of that, whether you're doing a t-shirt or a TV show or whatever, you still control it all and own it all. And that's something that no other companies out there really have in totality. Some of them have deals, but they don't represent it like Image Comics. And Image, to me, that Image eye is so iconic in terms of creator-owned comics and mainstream creators breaking ground by forming it. So that was our inspiration. And then their characters first. The way they started was with Spawn and Savage Dragon, and we're starting with Redcoat and Rook and our characters. We want to make this a character company and then creator company. Like it's, and by co-owning everything, all of it together, it changes the nature of the business. So we can actually build a business plan and a business that helps everybody that's a part of it. And that's a new thing. And it's creator operated too. We're not just part owners, we're owners, and we control the operation of it. And so it allows us to do things that, I mean, from small things like just posting previews, any kind of preview we want, to big things like our scheduling and, you know, the financial operations and our editorial teams and everything like that. It's really important to us to take all our years of experience, not just in creation, but also in production, and put it all together. And all of us are coming at it from different angles. So it's been incredibly rewarding. I've been working with a lot of these creators for years and years. Mm-hmm. And to do it together with people you really love it's pretty special. And at a place that you were inspired by. Like as a kid, if you told me I'd be a part of a company that was teamed up with Image Comics when I was a kid, I would have been so excited. And I am today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think anybody that's kind of our age remembers that early 90s boom on comic books and Image being right there at the forefront of it. I mean, lines at comic book stores to get autographs. I mean, I never experienced that before Image, right? And I was collecting before that. But yeah, to your point, I mean, what a huge time in comic books. And then all these years later, 30 years later, to be able to be part of it's got to feel pretty good.
It does. You know, one of the quotes we had from one of the founders was, "What took this generation so long to do it?" And they're right. There hasn't been kind of a mass team up like this with top level creators since the formation of Image. And so again, we take real pride in the fact that we get to do it with them. It's fun.
And I would think, you know, as you look toward the future of Ghost Machine, this is a pretty good way to attract amazing talent as well, right? I know you're starting with amazing talent, but I assume you have a lot of things that you want to accomplish, like maybe in your first 5 years, and to gain some amazing talent to be creator owned in all aspects like that has to be an amazing tool to do that.
It is. I mean, we just announced Ivan Reis, who I work with on Green Lantern, and we're doing a book called Hyde Street that's out in October. Nice. See a preview of that also in the Ghost Machine #1 issue in January. It comes out January 24th with everybody. So we're slowly but surely revealing, you know, the other aspects of Ghost Machine that we've been working on for quite a while. And that one shot will really set the stage for our first wave of books and characters and creators.
Yeah, I mean, 2024 has got to be huge for Ghost Machine. I don't know if you announced like how many titles. I know some of them like the Rook and some of the other ones that you've announced, but there's got to be quite a bit going on for 2024.
There is. We've got, you know, look, the key thing for us too is to create characters, and we're committed to these characters. Bryan Hitch and I are committed to Redcoat. Like, this is a book and a title we are committed on. Geiger we're committed to. Like, we're committed to these books and keeping these books going. They're not just going to be there and gone. The characters are going to, you know, we're telling long form storytelling with these characters. So we have miniseries, we have monthlies, but yeah, 2024 we've mentioned a lot of the titles that we're going to be launching in 24 and into 25, but there's always some more things to come.
Yeah. So as you're coming together with these folks and creating Ghost Machine, like, how far in advance have you been working on this until the day that you're able to now? Like, is this 3 or 4 years in the making? Like, what does that look like on the outside looking in?
Well, Tommy, it's really organic in how it grew, because after Gary Frank and I finished Doomsday Clock, Gary and I spoke, and it was really like, it's time for a creator-owned book. And I talked to Eric for years about Image, and there's an opportunity for us to do Geiger there. And so we did this. And as we did it, we had a lot of fun. It was great working with them. We did a story we loved. Yeah. And we always knew we were going to come back to him. and we did Junkyard Joe next. And we originally weren't sure we were going to keep doing creator-owned books, but it was so rewarding on so many levels that we're like, this is where we want to be now. We want to be an Image. And as we were doing that, Jason Fabok and I had just finished Batman 3 Jokers, and we were talking about doing a creator-owned book. And so then, and Bryan Hitch and I were talking, and then we started talking to Brad Meltzer and Pete Tomasi, and Francis Manapul, and all these other creators. And we started saying, like, it's time for us to do this right now, but how can we do it together? How can we actually build a better company, knowing what we know about how every company works? How can we build a company that is creator driven and owned and operated at every level? And it took us a long time to just build the logistics. What does that look like? What does it actually look like? And then also talk about the creative. What do we want out of our creative? Well, we love superheroes, and some of our books are kind of superhero adjacent, like Geiger, but they're really genre books. They're more about there's action heroes and supernatural characters and all this sci-fi, but it's not straight capes and tights. That's not what we're doing. And so all of that, the creative side and the business side, it all took years to come together. And like Jay and I have been working on Rook for, well over a year and a half, 2 years since Batman 3 Jokers. So we're just stacking up the books release. And same with Redcoat and all these other titles, is that we've just been working on them creatively. But the goal is to, again, introduce, you can see at our website, ghostmachinepro.com, the first wave of characters is to really put everything we have into establishing these characters and introducing these new stories and new genres and tones, and getting them out there for readers and collectors.
That's amazing. Now, I mean, you spent a long time at DC. What can you take away from DC in a positive way that you could utilize in Ghost Machine? Like, are there things that you're like, this worked really well and we want to do this at Ghost Machine?
Yeah, I mean, you look at the creative roster, right?
That's a good one. Yep.
That's one of the big positives. Is a lot of us met working on Marvel or DC titles and had great runs finding our creative groove together. Gary Frank and I worked on numerous books, Superman and Batman and Doomsday Clock and beyond. And Jay and I did Justice League and Batman 3 Jokers. Ivan and I worked on Aquaman and Green Lantern, Blackest Night. And so we're taking all of that, all of that expertise, and also editorial. When we work together with great editors, and the team is our team behind the scenes, like our people like Mike Cotton and others are from these companies as well. We recruited from the people we know and met with, and really, really love their jobs, love the medium, and love comic books, because this is comic books first before anything else. But the things that we learned were, relationships, working together. Great editorial direction is when there's both freedom and direction, right? You got to have both. You can't just have freedom. You also need direction. What's our goal? And then the path isn't narrow, because that can be too like micromanaging when it comes to creative. But the path is wide, but we're all marching in the same direction. We're all talking about characters, right? That our books, for the most part, most of our books are characters in title and in story, of course. Our titles are about characters, our stories about characters. And as long as we all have that goal of creating super engaging, cliffhanger driven, awesome books and stories with these characters, that's really the best editorial direction. When I was at DC was when you had a great editor or leadership that had direction but gave you freedom, and that's really what Didio gave us a lot of that when we were there. On Green Lantern and Aquaman, like, it was really, there was, all my editors and Dan and everybody helped us, help give us the tools and the freedom, but also gave us direction. And that was, I think, really, in hindsight, probably the most important thing. It's not to make all the books the same. It's just like, what are our goals, creative goals, and what are our business goals, and as long as we have those together and we know where our compass is pointing, then we're all good. Then we can go do what we do best, is create great books. Yeah.
How was that relationship with Dan Didio, and what kind of impact did he have on your career? Because I know you obviously have a pretty good relationship with Dan.
Yeah, Dan was the guy that got me to sign exclusive at DC when I was at Marvel still, and early on. And it was interesting because, you know, I like on Green Lantern, for example, Green Lantern Rebirth way back when I was working on like JSA and the Flash, and we just brought Hawkman back, and it worked pretty well. And he came and said, "Hey, I want to bring Hal Jordan back and Green Lantern back," and I said, oh, "Okay, do you have any ideas?" He said, "No." He said, "I just I'd like him to be Green Lantern again." I said, "Okay." So it was that kind of thing where I got to sit back and look at the box that all the characters were in. And I don't mind working in a box. It's fun to work in a box. And there was a lot of, like, back then people were like arguing about who their favorite Green Lantern was, which I always thought was silly because I love all of them.
Yeah.
I was like, look, I want to, if it's not just about bringing Hal Jordan back, it's about bringing the Green Lantern core back. The scope of the book centered around emotion and what that theme was about. And so I wrote up a proposal that brought back, you know, kept Kyle as a central Green Lantern and Hal, and brought John Stewart and Guy Gardner back in the front. And Kilowog who's like, at that point he was dead, I think, and most of the core was dead. It was like, how do we get it back to the grand scale of it so we could start clean and build? Because I like building. So I pitched it to Dan. I still have my same proposal, and the ending was slightly different. And Dan and I had a lot of discussions about it, and he was pretty adamant about a certain note. And at the end of the day, he was right about it. Yeah. And so I did that, but I did that not with, like, when I think sometimes people think like creative control means no one tells you to do anything, no one gives you notes, and that's not what creative control is. For me, I want collaboration. I want notes. When you get notes that are good from a good editor or a good leader or a good partner, it's the best. Whether it's an artist you're working with or someone like Dan or your editors, like Brian Cunningham's an amazing editor. You get notes from them, from you know, Jay or Gary or Brian on scripts I've written. I love it. Collaboration to me is key. Creative control is not about no notes, right? It's not about, I don't want any input from anyone.
Yeah.
Creative freedom is like, I get to tell the stories I want to tell. We get to release the book when we want to release it, not when an accountant wants the book out so they can make some money. Right. So for us, the you know, that was an example of the Green Lantern Rebirth thing was an example. And then Dan just let us go do our thing on Green Lantern. Like Sinestro Corps, you know, that just came out of the run. That was no one told us to do that. I just started writing that story and building that story, and Ivan was there drawing it. And then Sinestro Corps for me was a lot of learning from other events I did, like Infinite Crisis.
Right.
And saying what worked in that, what didn't work, how can I make this event even better? How can I build something that is only a Green Lantern story? And so giving us a direction, but also freedom was the key. That balance is key. Yeah. And Green Lantern, I had that. Blackest Night originally was going to be like Sinestro Corps. It was only going to be a crossover between Green Lantern and Green Lantern Corps, and it was going to have some connectivity to the DCU. And Dan was one that said, dude, it's bigger than that. It deserves to be bigger. And he was right. I'm glad that we broke it out into its own series, Blackest Night, because it was bigger, and it allowed me to tell more story in Green Lantern and Blackest Night and GLC. So that's an example. And there's been points where on Aquaman, the launch of Aquaman, when Ivan and I did it, like there's certain things I want to do in the book that Dan didn't agree with, or editorial didn't agree with, but he said, it's your book.
Yeah, that's awesome.
You believe in it. Go for it. I don't think it's the right idea, but you do. And at the end, when it came out, he's like, you know what? You're right. That was a great idea. But Dan was someone that always helped spark the fires and made things bigger, and would really, for me, whenever I said I really believe in this, he would be like, then go for it. And he was the one that pushed me to do bigger storylines, bigger things, just by saying, like, this is worth it. This is don't shy away from making this as big and grand as you can make it. Yeah. And that was, you know, that was key.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, on the other side of that, right, you have the positive side. What about the negative side? And not to create controversy, but no one's perfect, right? Whether it's Marvel, DC, Image, anybody, there's got to be some things you're just like I'm not going to repeat that at Ghost Machine.
I mean, really, the things, honestly, it's mostly logistics, because we want to be able to schedule our books when we know we can deliver them. It's really important that we have schedules that we build for ourselves with editorial teams that we're working with that help us navigate our schedules and stay on top of us in a positive way. But for us, it's really about it's more about the logistics, and then also things like, honestly, Tommy, as simple as like, Jay and I were talking when Batman 3 Jokers was coming out and these covers were doing well and stuff, and people were loving the images, and they were asking Jay, hey, can I buy a shirt of this cover? And Jay was like, I don't know, ask DC. And for us, I mean, you have a Ghost Machine hoodie on right now. I have a hat. For us, having the ability to have a storefront up instantly is that we have the ability, if a issue comes out and the cover's great and someone says, I'd love to buy that t-shirt, we can say no problem, and there's no red tape for us to go boom, and we build the shirt and it's up online in 24 hours. Because we're small and nimble, we don't have to wade through approvals to try and get something approved at a huge corporate company. To even just get a t-shirt on, you're like, well, who else has the license and who's going to make it and how are we going to do it? And we have to get approved by 10 different people before it goes online. It's not worth the time for them. For us, it is worth the time, and we can do it. We can put images of anything we want. No one can tell us not to post a cover or a page or a sneak peek. We can do the interviews like this without people telling us, you can't talk to that person. We only want you doing one interview this. You can't talk about that storyline. It gives us a freedom and being a creator controlled and owned and operated company. It gives us the freedom to just be nimble, right? Because we don't have layers of corporate structure on top of us that have directions that don't necessarily, line up with what's good for a comic book company.
Right. Yeah.
And that is that I'd say just we learned from when you got stuck in the mud a lot on certain things. How can we improve upon that? And that just comes from, again, the nature of what we are as Ghost Machine. The name came from the phrase "ghost in the machine," which is, as you probably know, like today it means like when a programmer or something doesn't behave the way it was supposed to, and you can't explain it.
Yeah. And
to me, the passion and the creative of writers and artists in comics, you can't reverse engineer that UFO. Right. It's magic, and we are that. We consider ourselves that magic in the machine. We are the ghost in the machine that is unique to us. Our books are going to only be, what they are because of us, and our characters the same way. So, when you talk about negatives, it's just really. It's just the idea of how big companies can be and how the corporate structures come on top of it. And there's corporate demands that don't line up with what's good for
sure
comic sometimes.
And that's in every industry, right? The bigger company.
The bigger. That's why we're really focused on quality, not quantity. We want great books out, but we don't have like, we need to publish 20 books a month. We're not doing that.
Right.
We have a very curated line of books, just like we have a very curated line of creators and a very curated line of people that are part of the company working with us.
Yeah, that's so awesome.
It's a small company. It's about about 20 people.
Yeah, and I think with any startup, right, the fight now begins to kind of hold that as long as you possibly can, right?
Right.
And I don't know if you've thought about that, because you spoke so elegantly about the larger you get. Unfortunately, that's just the nature of a large company, right? More people get involved, you get investors, all of a sudden you have competing interests at times. And that, I don't care what industry you're in, if you're in a large corporation, that's taking place, right? So as a startup, like, how important is it to maintain that as for long as possible? And have you thought about ways in which you'll go about trying to keep that nimble like that?
Yeah. So first off, it's all about the people.
Yeah.
Right? So we had a summit in New York before the comic convention. We had a 2-day summit with everybody and everyone meeting together in the same room for the first time. Ivan was there too, secretly.
Talk about a powerful room though with some amazing creators, man.
It was awesome. But when we were in this room, we were all meeting and spending time together about what we want. What do we want this to be?
Yeah.
So we got to talk about it. So everyone, again, like we built our compass, right? We built our compass. We built our company, not just in the comics we make, but in who we are and what we do and how we work together and ultimately what we're going to be. And one of the things that amazed me is when we're in this room, there was one point where I'm like, there's nobody outside this room that can tell us what to do.
That's awesome.
Right?
That's a good feeling.
It's a really good feeling and really powerful. And everyone contributed to the conversation and to what the company is. Everybody's a different kind of human being, but everybody respects and appreciates one another. And they're all great people. Mm-hmm. So the key to really keeping that is like, we know we're going to face challenges, disappointments. You know, if you know something, and this is in life, mm-hmm. If you know you're going to face something tough, if you know a speed bump is going to eventually show up, you're going to eventually cross a pothole in the road. And just be ready for it. And when it comes to you, you won't be spun out. You'll just say, okay, let's take on this problem. Man. How do we fix it? Mm-hmm. A lot of things we talk about how nothing's written in concrete. The concrete's always wet, right? Meaning that like we have a certain like there's things from just, you know, do you do alt covers and how many?
Yeah.
You know, and you say, well, this is what we think we're going to do. We're going to see how it works. Mm-hmm. But don't be afraid to pivot if you need to pivot.
Yeah.
And at the same time, we're committed to these characters. Like we are in it for the long term. These if audience what needs to grow over time, it will tolerate that. We're good with that. Mm-hmm. Because we believe in what we're doing. Mm-hmm. So, you know, to keep Ghost Machine the magic that it is for us is to really never forget, you know, why we did it, what we want. And we're having a yearly summit where everyone flies in that we're going to continue to talk about this and hammer it no matter how big we get or what else we're doing. The comics, it's really, that's our goal, is to make this, you know, the greatest place you would ever want to be, not only working, but be a part of, because again, everyone owns it.
Yeah, that's so cool, man. Well, I mean, if it's okay, I mean, we kind of started on the DC. Maybe we could take a little bit of time just to talk about your DC. I don't know how you take all those years and talk a little bit, but I mean, as you look at DC in particular, is there one title that you're most proud of? Can you even do that? I mean, I don't know if that's difficult to do.
You know what? There's a lot of, look, not every story it's a little bit like a batting average, right? Not every story you work on works as well as you want it to work. You're always trying to do your best. I'm really proud of a lot of the work I've done over the years. But some things like, you know, all the Superman books that Gary Frank and I did, or some of my favorite comics to look at, those to me are like some really nice, clean, emotional stories that just celebrate who Superman is, like Superman Legion, the Brainiac storyline, Secret Origin. Like those three stories really still stand out as some of my favorites I had the privilege and honor of working on. Doomsday Clock I put in there too, because that's really a Superman story. And that story ultimately is about, you know, Superman is the most influential character in history and that in existence, and what a man of action and inspiration can do and affect. You know, but if I look through it all, I mean, I'm really, obviously the Green Lantern stuff, Aquaman, you know, anything with Gary, Batman 3 Jokers, Dark Side War, like I could go across. There's things I love, like the Superboy run I did with Francis Manapul. I really love that little 6-issue story, kind of underrated and obscure story, but one of my favorites. But it really comes down to the people I worked with.
Yeah.
DC Universe Rebirth, that one shot. Wally West he's been my favorite character since I was a kid. So to be able to bring him back in that way and have it turn out so well, that emotional reunion between Barry and Wally is one of my favorite moments I ever got to write. I have those pages hanging up on my wall. Yeah. But like I could go on and on. There were so many. It's really about the creators I worked with and the storylines. And there's certain aspects of every title I worked on I'm really proud of. But you know, the Flash run with Scott Collins is one of my favorites too, going back to the early days, because I never dreamed I would be able to write the Flash. He was my favorite character when I was reading Wally West Adventures when they were first coming out, and I always wanted to write the Flash. It was like my dream job of all dream jobs, and so when I got to do that, it was amazing. But the Captain Cold issue, that 182, one of my favorite comics I ever did. The only comic I think I ever wrote in one day, because I had the story in my head for years, and I just stayed at the keyboard until I was done. But I mean, I'm really proud, and again, I feel privileged that as many of the DC stories I got to do, as many of the runs I got to do, from Teen Titans to, Justice Society and Stargirl, all that stuff, Hawkman. I mean, it was Rags Morales' work on Hawkman was so beautiful, that run, such a great run. That was so fun. But my Mike McCone, it gets me to reminisce on all this stuff. But I don't have one. I just have a lot of great memories, and there, all those things, all those great memories turn into hardcovers on your shelf.
Yeah, exactly. I got quite a few of them too. I got a lot of your omnibus. So
52. I look at all those ones. Like 52 was a great experience because I got to work with three of my favorite writers and artists in the business, with Grant, Mark, and Greg, and then Keith Giffen. It was to do that was just, I never thought I'd have the opportunity to even talk to these people, let alone work with them as much as I did.
Yeah, that's
George
huge.
Perez on like Legion of Three Worlds. Like
George Perez.
I mean, I got to work with George Perez on that. Like I've got to work with all of my absolute, favorite creators in history. Like I'm incredibly grateful for all of that, because I've written thousands of DC comics at this point.
Yeah.
And really every character I wanted to do. Yeah. There's only a couple that I didn't get to, and they're very obscure. I love working on Booster Gold with Dan Jerkins. That was a dream. My favorites of all time. So it's endless. I could go on and on with the DC stuff. I could talk about any of those characters because I love them all. Any of the creators I got to work with, like it was great. And this is, it's for me, Flashpoint with Andy Kubert. Like I can keep going. Just the great artists I got to work with over the years and continue to. It's just, I feel very fortunate.
Yeah. Well, the one thing I noticed when you were sharing that is obviously a passion about these characters, but a lot of the best memories are actually working with a certain person on that character that made it memorable.
Yeah. Well, what happens is for me that it's just like working on the Stargirl TV show. When it that whole recipe of who you work with and how it goes into the product, right? Yeah. And it really does show through. And when you meet someone like a great creative collaborator in comics like Gary Frank, right? Gary and I, there's a reason Gary and I have worked together for over 20 years straight. Is because we both want the same thing from a story. Yeah. We want character and emotion.
Yeah.
We want something different. If you look at our work on Shazam or Junkyard Joe or Geiger, it's all very different, but it's all rooted in emotion. We have those scenes where it's just emotional character stuff, but it is like a lot of those it's a combination, right? It's a combination of, the creator you work with, the editor you work with, and the character, right? Yeah. And some of the, like my favorite characters growing up, I remember I used to do lists of the top 10, and Flash was number 1, and Superboy, Connor Kent's Superboy was number 2 when he came out, and the JSA was in there. And so to be able to work on those characters, it also is a privilege to be able to, work with people you love on characters you love. And I look back, I got to write the Teen Titans 1, Green Lantern 1, Aquaman 1, Justice League 1, Flash 1. A lot of issue 1s, a lot of relaunches that I never.
Yeah.
Society number 1. I never thought I'd have the privilege of doing that. When Gary Frank and I went to do Superman, I asked for Action Comics. He said, "Okay, you want to do Superman?" I said, "I want Action," because Action Comics is the original superhero title. I want to have a run on that because that to me is a huge legacy. And I got to do Action Comics for a couple of years, like I think 3 maybe, between Adam Kubert. It's another. I mean, I got to work with Dick Donner and Adam Kubert on that. Yeah. And then Gary and I and some other issues here and there. Like that was working on Action Comics was a big privilege. So it's all a combination of who you work with, and then of course I love these characters, so I'm always going to be super excited about them. There's a couple characters at DC I would have loved to take a deeper run at, but obscure ones. And I've mentioned them in other videos, like Metamorpho, or I always loved that character because is some of the comics I first ever read, and when I found an old box of 60s comics in my grandma's attic. But there's a few characters out there that I would have loved to kind of dig into deeper. But I feel like I really got to take I really got to take a nice run at the DC universe in so many different ways, and the characters that there's really no stone left unturned for me. It's all just Legion of Superheroes. I would have loved to have done more with the Legion of Superheroes. I love the Legion. Gary Frank and I actually almost did a Superman and the Legion book after our run, but we went to Batman Earth One instead. There's characters that I love there. Same with Marvel. Like, I love Hulk and Iron Man, Captain America, but yeah, when I look at DC, there's not a whole lot that I mean, all those, I don't know what I would pick for my favorite thing. Green Lantern was probably ultimately one of my favorites, just because it was a decade-long run too, and we got to introduce so many new characters like Simon and all the
Simon Badge, Jessica Cruz,
Saint Walker and Trocitus. Larfleeze is still one of my favorite characters. Right, that's a crazy character.
Yeah. What about the emotional spectrum? Like, how did that come about?
That really was an organic extension of what I think Green Lantern's all about. Was when you talk about overcoming fear, and it's not about being without fear, because that's a boring story, but overcoming fear is a story. Mm-hmm. And when I did Green Lantern Rebirth, I always start with, what is this about really at its core? Why is this different than any of why can't this be like a Superman story or a Firestorm story? Like, why does this have to be a Green Lantern story? And for me, it's very specific. I remember reading some superhero comics when I was just reading them, and when I could feel like I could just remove one superhero and put another superhero in the story and be the same, it just wasn't. It just didn't work for me. That's why Death of Superman worked so well, because only Superman's death could affect the entire DC universe in the way it did, and what Superman meant and his return meant. I love that storyline, because you can only really do that with Superman because of the impact that characters had and how it affected everybody with the armbands and everything. It really worked. Yeah, as a big event, but also emotional event. And so for Green Lantern, it was all about overcoming fear, and so Rebirth was all about Hal recognizing that he gave in to fear, and this is why, and how does he overcome it, both emotionally and literally. Yeah. And ultimately, as Green Lantern, my Green Lantern run is all about self-awareness of emotions, because we all feel the same thing. We all can feel fear. We all can feel rage. We all can feel avarice and love and compassion and all these things, hope. And so it was when I started dealing with fear, and how once he overcame fear for me, he had a kind of that had to be extend beyond him. How can he process what anger does? Yeah. What hope can do, what love is, and so what how avarice can affect us in kind of humorous ways too. Because some of the stuff you got to have some levity with it too. But Green Lantern grew organically into, well, if this is about, yellow was fear, and green was will and courage, and they came at each other. Mm-hmm. They already played with Black Hand a little bit. Yeah. So there's black power there. Mm-hmm. And then there's red power and blue. But what do they each represent? And then the spectrum it exists already. So if you're going to do a spectrum of emotions, each power affects you differently. And then the idea was, if the fulcrum is green, right? And so that's the one where the user has the most control. But as you start to go out on the edges of the emotional spectrum to red and violet and rage and love, that's when you start to lose yourself to the emotions, which we all have, right? Everyone's been so angry they're not even thinking straight, or so in love that they're not even thinking straight. And so that was really where it grew just out of what Green Lantern was about, and extended from processing fear and overcoming fear to processing all emotion. Yeah. And then it built to Blackest Night was really hey, we're all alive. If you're alive, you feel these emotions. Yeah, you just do. There's no way around it. You just do. You're going to be angry at some point, and probably out of control, and say some things you don't mean, but in the moment you might believe them. Yeah. And so you got to learn how to process anger and recognize and say, it's okay. I can have that, and love and all these other emotions. So really, it was Hal's journey to processing who he was, right, and how emotions affect him, and how to get through that, and how to recognize that, and then I could take it and say, well, look, this is what a Red Lantern is. When you are consumed with rage all the time, you become this way. This is just who you're going to be. Yeah. And that's where it grew out very organically from the center point of the character. And because it was based on emotion, it had story. Yeah, absolutely. It was just like, oh, look, they have blue lasers or red lasers. It would have been,
Yeah.
A lot of times you see people kind of do derivative storytelling of these natures. They start to do like, they take a concept and then just kind of repeat it without any emotional understructure or meaning to it. And that's when it just feels more like a cartoon, right? Or a derivative take on something than it does a real expansion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And to me, that's where it came from.
Yeah. I mean, that's awesome, because also I think, like you mentioned, emotion a lot. And I think as a writer, right, connecting on emotion with the reader is how you get them to really buy into the story. I think it starts from that aspect, right? To be able to touch certain things that they could relate to, because that's where you start to get buy-in, right?
100%. I mean, it doesn't work if you don't have that, to me. That's why every story we start with is, what is this really about?
Yeah.
What are we exploring as people, as living beings?
Yeah.
What are we feeling? What is this about?
Right. Yeah.
And that's, otherwise there's nothing there. And when you're working on characters that have been around for decades and decades and decades, you're trying to find that newness. What's new about it, right? But you also want to stay true to who the character is.
Yeah.
I did that with Aquaman when it was like, okay, Aquaman, what's Aquaman about?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Ultimately, the king of Atlantis. There's a responsibility with that, an identity with that.
Mm-hmm.
When you go backwards and say, well, he grew up on land.
Mm-hmm.
His father was a lighthouse keeper, very humble lighthouse keeper who warns ships. He's there to protect ships from crashing into the rocks. Mm-hmm. That's a very noble job. And you go to the Queen of Atlantis, which is a very noble job, but a very responsible job. You're leading a whole society, and then you find out you're as a child that you're half.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You're half Atlantean, half human. And then going to those two cultures, like, what's it mean to be of two worlds, and how do you reconcile that? And Arthur's journey was one of, I don't want to be Atlantean and be king of Atlantis, because that's not how I feel. I don't relate to them. And they look at me and think I'm a half-breed, and they look down on me. And on land, as when I started the book, it was like, okay, I don't feel totally at home on land either, because people look at me weird.
Yeah.
Where do I fit?
Mm-hmm.
Where do I fit? And Aquaman, the journey for those 25 issues I wrote was really, I wanted him to ultimately take the throne.
Yeah.
Reconciling the two halves of himself.
Mm-hmm.
And that was him saying, it's not that I don't belong in either one. I actually am the bridge between both.
Yeah.
So I'm the keeper. And obviously we based the movie on that storyline and that arc, but I am the bridge between both. That's my responsibility. Mm-hmm. And I thought I wasn't worth anything, but actually I'm the only one that can do this.
Yeah. That's awesome.
So that's where the stories come from. And then I build everything cool on top. You want to build all the fun on top of it, the double spreads and the splashes and the bad guys and the, fights and the tidal waves smashing into cities and everything. You want to build all the fun, but until you have that understructure, and it's a little invisible sometimes, mm-hmm. right? Yeah. I don't put all the cool, fun, big stuff on top of it. Mm-hmm. You got to have that emotional skeleton and compass first, and then you start to build. Once you know what the story is about, then you build everything on top of it, and the best events, it's a little invisible, but you feel it the whole time.
Yeah.
The action and the emotion for me are always the same thing. Like when someone says, okay, now we're going to cut to action, then we're going to cut to emotion. I'm like, you're doing it wrong if you're separating them out. Mm. The same thing, right? The ultimate emotional moment and the ultimate action moment should be colliding together.
Wow.
When Aquaman has to take a stand and say, I'm king of Atlantis, I have to take the throne and stop Orm. Mm-hmm. in order to save the world, and he's taking his identity. I'm claiming who I am and what I have to do, my responsibility. It's the same moment.
Yeah.
Right. That's key in everything to me.
I mean, that's incredible for anybody writing a comic book. I think you just kind of laid out the foundation of how to write a good story. As a writer and as a creator, you're limited in a comic book by how much you could say in words. So you really have to lean on your artist to be able to tell a portion of that story as well, right? How important is that dance or that relationship between writer and artist to be able to bring forth everything that you just mentioned in a comic book?
Oh, it's key. That's why I work with the same amazing artists I work with over and over and over.
Yeah.
And I do write differently for everyone I work with. I write differently for Gary than I would for Jay, or Bryan, or Ivan. Like, I just write differently. Because I've developed a working relationship. Obviously, Gary and I have for a long time, and Jay and I have, and Ivan and I have. Bryan and I are just starting with Redcoat, and so starting to learn his language and what he does. But we're creating this together, so it's very different. But it's vital. Like, I think in a weird way, and we talked about this with Ghost Machine, is that when Image Comics came out, all the artists were like they sold books. And then there was some weird backlash years later of like, no, the writers have to writers are people buy it for the writing. And then there's been kind of like not just a back and forth. And I'm like, well, look, the artists and the writers are equally, they're super important, because the combination of great art, great story, and collaboration is what makes a great comic book. You need both.
Yeah.
You can't have just a great story and like the art's okay, or vice versa. It just doesn't work. So it's vital to work with artists you connect with, and everyone connects differently. Styles are vastly different on writing and art, and it's really interesting. We talk about it a lot, but it's super important to have both working in unison. And if they don't, you can feel it.
Yeah. Man, you can feel it, and as a reader, right away too when the story and then the art that's supporting that story or telling that portion of that story doesn't align. Right away that I'm not sure the writer and the artist were really on the same page.
Yeah, so, I mean that's why we talk. I talk to these guys every day, like all day we're talking about story and what we want and the point of the book and point of the character and where did the story come from? Like, where did it come from? What experience did we have that we shared, or that it's coming from this?
Exactly.
And that's what, that's the goal of that's what Ghost Machine is all about. It grew out of that too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a perfect segue, Geoff, right into the Unnamed. Because I think what you're saying is very relatable to the overarching, the Unnamed, and how all these titles will kind of fall in. Can you kind of share with us a little bit about how you came about, or you and the team came about the Unnamed and what that represents within Ghost Machine?
Sure. Yeah. So, Ghost Machine, we're launching with kind of 4 shared universes of characters. They're all slightly different in tone and with the Unnamed, that one started with Geiger and Junkyard Joe and continues with Geiger and Redcoat and some of the other books and characters we got coming up. But the Unnamed it's a group of characters that are they're like modern American myths, like Paul Bunyan and John Henry were myths, and you're like, were they real or not real? And I wanted to kind of develop these other characters like Junkyard Joe and Redcoat that have these stories, and they're called the Unnamed because their stories are told, but you're not quite sure if they're real, and their stories, like, they're just they're being told for the first time. And so I wanted to create a kind of an alternate American history that is it's ours, but you're seeing stories that happen that you've never been aware of before, and in different time periods. Because again, I wanted to start exploring something both familiar. If you're familiar with my work at DC, it'll feel familiar, but it'll also feel new because it's slightly different. Junkyard Joe is very different than anything I've done, but it still feels like probably a book I would do. And that's with all the Unnamed. You've got characters like Geiger, who essentially takes place 25 years in the future after a nuclear world war. And it's about a man who's gained these bizarre and dangerous abilities. He's nicknamed the Glowing Man, and he spent all his days and nights protecting a fallout shelter his wife and children were in, scavengers, and when that is blown open, spoiler alert, and in the first arc that we did, and his family did not survive, he now wanders the nuclear wasteland, looking for purpose. And Geiger, #1, the monthly book, will kick off a pretty big storyline as we introduce a new character he'll be teamed up with. But the rest of the Unnamed all take place in different eras. Like Redcoat takes place from the 1776 all the way through today and beyond. But Redcoat's adventure, his first arc takes place in 1892 when he teams up with a 12-year-old kid from Munich named Albert Einstein.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit of a throwback to Pirates of the Caribbean and Raiders of the Lost Ark, and Highlander, Dash of Hellblazer. Like, it's a very different type of book, but it's probably the funniest title character I've written in quite a while, because he's just such a bastard. This guy's just a bastard. He's like,
you hate him, but you love him at the same time.
And he's like the last person that deserves to be immortal. This redcoat soldier who came over here because he was being paid to fight, the colonists, and ended up being accidentally immortal, gaining the ability to become immortal, and what that comes with it, and that explores. But that all came from like how hard is it to change as a human being? How long does it really take? Someone to learn from their mistakes and change. Like, if you live 500 years, would you change? And he's a guy too. He's not talented at all. He says, I'm a terrible shot, but when you shoot at people for 200 years, you just get good. There's a lot of fun. There's a lot of fun analysis about what being alive is, and like what living is, and what, like, as a human being, what's it all about, and
what lessons should be learned, right?
Exactly. What lessons should be learned, what lessons can't be learned, what are we doomed to repeat our mistakes, like all that fun stuff, and then wrapped in a really cool, high action, colorful, epic adventure that only Bryan Hitch can draw. But all the unnamed characters exist in different times, periods in American history, and their adventures take place from 1776 all the way to 25 years from now. And there's a timeline in Geiger and in the books that you've probably seen that lays out the other characters, hints at the other characters that will be introducing, some of them in their own titles and some of them within the universe of these books. But the Unnamed, I have a multiple year storyline built for them, much in the same way I've done with a lot of my other books at DC. It's nice to be on long form storytelling like this. We're not just doing miniseries. And so I'm excited for people to jump in and learn more about them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, there's such, like, obviously we have Ground Zero that just launched. We'll have issue 2 in December. And then, like you mentioned, Ghost Machine will be kind of the major title. Here's the ash can from New York Comic Con in January. And that's really the major kickoff, right, to all these other titles that will follow, right?
Yeah. With Ghost Machine #1, you get previews of original stories that aren't going to be in the books, but you'll get Geiger, Redcoat, Rook Exodus, the Rocket Feathers, another title we just haven't announced quite yet, Hyde Street, which is our horror title in universe by myself and Ivan. And there's some other books that come out of that as well. So, you'll get a lot of beautiful artwork. I mean, you're going to get stunning artwork and some great stories. It's 64 pages, $4.99, all original. And the first appearances of a lot of these characters too, which is cool.
That's so cool, man. It is awesome. Well, I mean, there's so many exciting news. Congratulations, Geoff, and the entire team over at Ghost Machine. I think as a fan of you, I'm super excited about what's next, that next chapter for you, because you did spend so much time at one place, and we all know you from that place. It's really refreshing to see you do some of these other things that are creator owned, and I'm super happy for you as a fan, and cannot wait to see everything that's coming next year, because I think it's going to be a banger, man.
Thanks, Tom. I appreciate it. Yeah, I'm again very, very lucky, very fortunate, and really excited about this next chapter.
Yeah. Well, Geoff, I mean, I hope maybe next year, sometime toward the end of the year, we could do this again and talk about what's coming for 2025. But I just want to say thank you. Appreciate you coming on the podcast. Again, huge fan, very excited for everything that's happening at Ghost Machine. And if anybody wants to learn more, I'll make sure I put all the links in the inscription. That way you could go to Ghost Machine and you could check it out for yourself. There's awesome pictures of the Unnamed, so you could kind of get the highlights of what's happening. And then obviously you could get your gear. There's a lot of really cool gear and stickers and all kinds of stuff, hats. And if you have an idea for something that you want, I guess they could just kind of send a note through the website of like, hey, what about a shirt like this? And I think that's so cool, man, that you're in a place where you could be that nimble. So.
Oh, it's awesome. Yeah. GhostMachinePro.com, and you can, and Ghost Machine Pro on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. We have all sorts of stuff up, but we're all listening. We're all there. Anything you guys want or need, any feedback from readers, retailers, we're here, and we're working on these books, and we're really excited about it.
Well, I could tell you, as a collector of action figures, I'm hoping that we'll have like a Geiger and a Junkyard Joe. I mean, you're working very closely to someone who makes figures, so it'll be really cool to see a line one day of that as well.
You will see. I can't say exactly what, but there's already something that's been good. Yeah.
Very cool.
More news on that soon.
All right, sounds good. Well, Geoff, thank you again. Really appreciate your time, and best of luck to you, my friend.
Thanks, Tommy.
Yeah, you bet.